journalists, each one of whom is quite not capable, will in fact outdo anything that I have to say. Alok, may I begin with a gentle correction? You use the term puritanical before the Mughals. Any dynasty which could drink so much could never have been. I mean, whatever. Yeah. Absolutely. Noor Jahan could put back quite a bit. And not only that, she was a merchant, she was a owner of one of the great merchant fleet of her time, a very good business person. In fact, rather sadly, the memory of the only Puritan in that dynasty, Aurangzeb, has tended to overwhelm the memory of his predecessors. And it is no accident that the empire collapsed, because he forgot that in our country and in our society, power is exercised through a resonant belief in our cultural, civilizational values, and second, through cultural synthesis. I must begin with evidence of what I mean by this. And while I believe that the whole book is fact, all the information in the book is from primary sources. There is no secondary source. And all the primary sources, whether they were in Persian, have been translated. Begin with, in the 19th century, the process began with English bureaucrats, and it was taken to a culmination by Sir Jadunath Sarkar, who actually brought the whole of the Aurangzeb opus before every previous. And they also believe had a great sense of history. All of them recorded what they're doing, so the primary sources are full of it. And it will surprise you. From Babur onwards, it's very famously is there in the book that the reference to God in Baburnama is at least 300 times. But only 30 or 32 times he describes God as Allah. The rest of the time he describes God as Tengri. Just as the Persians describe God as Khuda, which has been eliminated. Because the original term for divinity, God belongs to creation. Faith comes far later. So the original term for God in these societies, the Mughals were great believers, great devotees even in their Mongol inheritance. And this Mongol inheritance, you would be surprised, at the very first volume of the Khabar translation of Abul Fazl. In the very first volume, there is a tribute to the Mongol goddess Alankua. And Alankua is a goddess who reflects, in some senses, what could be called by an agnostic. I'm talking about the terminology of agnostic or a disbeliever. The Mary myth, which is that the radiance was a divine birth. Alankua has the same divine birth thing, and they believe that the family of Changiz emerges from that divine birth. And these were very powerful beliefs, which they harmonized with their understanding and with their narrative of Islam. It was never in conflict. In fact, the conflicts that have arisen in the name birth are very post Abdul Wahab and Shah Waliullah. Shah Waliullah headed the madrasa, which is the last madrasa created by the Mughal Empire as such, which is Aurangzeb's madrasa created in 1690. But I'll give you a few glimpses within the time that I have. Abul Fazl attributed, when I meant their respect for divinity as the birth of creation, attributed 4 texts of Sanskrit astronomy that they have come from God to divine origin. And they were Brahma Siddhant, Surya Siddhant, Som Siddhant, Brihaspati Siddhant. The, there was nothing that they did without reference to the astrologers from the morning right up to the last minute of the day. Humayun himself was a very major astrologer. He predicted his own death. He predicted his death up to the day and even up to the afternoon. And the story is absolutely fascinating. Just again to challenge your puritanical, his indulgence, in addition to some excellent wine, his indulgence used to be opium. And so in this day in January, his servant was preparing the pellets of opium for the next month or so, just as I'm sure everybody here has pellets of the daily medicine dosage prepared and kept in their little boxes. And that is the thing. And he told his servant, okay, don't prepare for the 8th day, because it will not be necessary. And on the morning of the 8th day, he himself was an astrologer. He wore his clothes exactly to the colors of the zodiac. His carpets were determined by the colors of the zodiac. His court arrangements were determined by patterns of the zodiac. And he said, this afternoon, a great event is going to take place which will shake the empire. And that exactly was precise. The very first chapter is something which is absolutely beyond belief in the normal sense, which is that the birth of Akbar. And you must understand that when Akbar was born, there was no empire. Humayun was on the run, hunted not only by Sher Shah, who was a very effective ruler, he was a great ruler, hunted by Sher Shah on the other side and by his brothers, who were based in Kabul on the other. Both were after his life for their own reasons. And he was bankrupt. He went to Umarkot as a mercenary force. That is why he got shelter there. And the moment he went into Umarkot, also entering the fort after checking with the stars, is the moment correct, auspicious or not? And he went in, and within a day, Umarkot told him that he had to go to Thatta to fight the Raja of Thatta, who he had been employed to do. And when he went there, he had to take all the men who were in his under his command or in his posse. The only one man he left behind was Maulana Chand. Maulana Chand, a Muslim, but that was his astrologer at the time. And the only instruction that Maulana Chand had been given was to record with exact detail the exact moment of birth. Not even by a second, because he wanted the horoscope that would be devised out of that birth to be as accurate as possible, and possibly he would do it himself. And they had various schools, including the Greek, the Persian schools of astrology, doing so. And when he did that, when Maulana Chand, within that, when 2 evenings later, suddenly news spread across the fortress that Hamida Bano, labor pains had begun. And when the labor pains had begun, this Maulana went into apoplectic. This is all from Abul Fazl, the official history. He went apoplectic. And he says the child can't be born now. 5 hours later, there will come a moment which comes but rarely in history. Very rarely in history. In 1,000 years, that moment will not come. And whoever the child born at that particular moment will be a Chakravarti of a kind not seen in 1,000 years. So he can't be born now. The women looked at him and began laughing and said, "Get away, you old man. Once the law of nature begins its process, you can't stop it." And then he did something quite extraordinary. There was a rather plain-looking woman who must have been among the dais. He suddenly, in his spring, he caught her by the scruff of the neck, raced into the bedroom, went into Hamida Bano's bedchamber, opened the curtains, and shoved her face in the darkness in front of Hamida Bano. And she got so frightened that her labor pains stopped. And then he started worrying whether she would exceed the time or not. But he was born at exactly the moment as he records. See, but this was the level and faith of belief. And then Akbar instituted the role of a Jyotik Raja or Lord Astrologer, and which will, I'm sure, surprise many of you to know that until Aurangzeb, for 125 years, the chief Jyotik Rai, the Lord Astrologer, was a Brahman from Varanasi. And without his permission, they would not. I can give you the names, but I am also encouraged not to do so, so that you might actually buy the book. And let me just tell you that the Aurangzeb, because of his what would today be termed Islamism, although that term is inadequate and not very correct, because of it he hid, because there is an ayat of the Quran that you do not believe in seers and so on. But even he never did. You know, he was coronated twice. Once after he defeated Dara Shikoh, and the second time after he defeated his brother Shah Shuja. Both times, even in the middle of battle, his astrologers postponed his coronation by 3, 4, 5 weeks. And just to cut a very, very long story short, he actually was the only person who did not permit an official record, because he saw the record of his first 10 years and said, this is better hidden. And he actually had all the records, but his correspondence and his court chronicles have survived and were translated by Sir Jadunath Sarkar, to whom we owe our knowledge of what happened then. And in this is a very interesting story. Like a good Mughal father, he had all his sons sent to jail at some point or the other. And he told finally after his eldest son, who became the Bahadur Shah of 1712, he told him, after 8 years in prison, he called him and said that, oh, don't worry about your 8 years in prison. Joseph, the prophet, if he hadn't been sent to prison, he would never have learned how to rule Egypt. So it was good for you. Now, let me tell you something as father to son. This is the only record we have. And as father to son, he said, I've seen all your brothers. One of them, to Nalaik Tha, who has been driven out to Persia. And he says, well, you are going to get the throne now. Among all the available, all of you are useless, but you are the best. And he said that, let me tell you something which is not known. I had no chance of becoming emperor. My father's favorite was Dara Shikoh. And if Dara had become emperor, things would have been, history would have been different. What you learned, this book has about Dara, again I tell you, is not beyond even our imagination. And even if Dara, something had happened to him, and things happened. People died young in those days. My elder brother Shah Shuja would have been. He was much better ruler. He ruled Bengal for 23 years, and his astrologer was Balabhadra, a Bengali, his chief astrologer. And then he said, but I always knew that I would be the emperor, because the horoscope written at my birth said that I would rule, nobody else. And I'm 80 years old, everything that has happened in my life was predicted in that horoscope. And that belief in astrology contributed to the cultural synthesis, contributed to the creation of and the promotion of Hindi. They created words which are beautiful. I'll just give you one, because Sudhanshu, if I don't say this, he will not forgive me. He's a master of language and master of rhetoric. For example, they created for burqa. You know what a burqa is. What was the Hindi term for it? Chitragupt. Beautiful. But the rest after you read the book. Thank you all very, very much for being here.